Going to be a bit of a shorter video today, mostly because I think it's a fairly direct subject and it doesn't really affect me directly. We're talking about paid DMing, paid games, pay to play. Usually it's D&D, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure other RPGs do. People do this for other RPGs sometimes, but mostly you hear about it with D&D, and that's understandable. It is known that there are far fewer people willing to DM than there are people who only want to be a player. And so you are in high demand. So why not get some dollars for it? Why not make some money doing a service that entertains other people? And in concept, I get it. I fully understand how this phenomenon comes to be and how people would think, that's a good idea, let's do that. On both sides of the equation, like I will pay for services or I will charge for my services, that kind of thing. I think there's an inherent problem though, which is that DMing is not just a service, it is a relationship. It is an ongoing relationship between the GM and the players that I think when you start to get money involved, it becomes a lot more complicated, a lot more iffy. I've heard of groups where this was not an issue, where it was fine, everything was fine. They got through an entire campaign and everyone was happy. They got their money's worth. But I think more often than not, paid DMing is going to run into this issue where the DM's job is to entertain the players rather than doing the normal things for DM, which is like, we're going to be collaborative here and I'm going to be tough but fair. There's an inherent incentive for the DM not to do the things that they would normally do if they were just running for a group of their friends, because of, the desire not to alienate the players, not to make them feel like they're not winning enough. There's that you run into, like, being a GM for any RPG is always going to be this balancing act of like the responsibility to the game, the responsibility to the players, lots of like little independent incentive systems that are all working together to create a fairly complicated social contract. And when you add in the financial incentives, well, then it becomes even more complicated. And I think there's not that many people who could really pull it off. And what I'm not trying to do here is say like, oh, if you're looking for D&D, don't ever go to a pay-to-play game. I'm just saying I wouldn't. Because I think that the dynamic of like the added dynamic of the financial incentives of like, you need to make the game the way I want it, or else I'm going to walk away and you're going to get less money. I'm taking away the financial incentive if this game doesn't work out the way I want it to. That's not a good relationship for a player and a DM. That's terrible. Like you can, like, I don't have to explain why, all the different ways in which that is a bad idea. So I wouldn't do it. And I don't recommend it for people. If they ask, if they're like, I'm looking at joining a game and there's a pay to play GM, what do you think? Like, regardless of any other details of that campaign, I'm going to say, I wouldn't do that. I'm going to recommend not doing that. People who want to run the game and are going to do so because they find it fun, because they find it entertaining, because they find it fulfilling, those are the kinds of people who are going to be running the superior game. And you're going to have a much more natural and easier time getting along with that person and that group, because they're not there for any kind of financial gain. They're there because they want to be. When something that you love becomes a job, it's very easy to stop loving it and stop being passionate about it in the same way as it was when it's just a hobby. And then that's, of course, not a universal experience. Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes you do what you love and you never work a day in your life, right? That's what they say. And that's true for some people. But for a lot of the time, I think there's definitely an element of like, once you get money involved, like I'll play poker, I'll play any kind of poker or card game or board game or whatever. But once you start putting money bets into it, oh, now it's a lot less fun. Now it's a competition. Now I need to win. because there's something on the line. There's money on the line. Something about money really gets people twisted in regards to what is important in an activity once money becomes involved. And I think it's not quite all the way to like it's a full death sentence, but it certainly is, I think, an unhealthy element for RPGs. So I think paid DMing services they're super iffy, especially between strangers. The one group that I know of that did it successfully, they were already friends, and it's just that like they were one was paying the other to run a game so that they would have because it wasn't super convenient for him, but he could justify making the time in his life to run that game because they had the additional income, and that was fine. At least that's my understanding. I didn't really I wasn't part of that group, so that's my understanding of how that dynamic went down. But yeah, I don't have a lot else to say. I think this is kind of intuitive stuff. And I think the reason why it happens is because people get desperate, I haven't had a game in a year. I really got that D&D. I'm jonesing for it. I got to get that itch. And so they kind of get desperate, and lo and behold, there's some games that haven't filled up because they're pay to play. So I understand the motivation to partake in that. I just think it's not a great idea. I think it's a almost always going to be an inferior experience to a non-paid game. All else being equal, it's going to be a worse experience because of that element of money, the financial incentives, and the weirdness that creates in the player DM relationship.